What would you do if the person you nurtured, loved, and sacrificed everything for became the one to take it all away? In the heart of Detroit's East Side, Aurelia Carter was a beacon of hope in a neighborhood overshadowed by hardship. Her unwavering love for her grandson, Langston, was her driving force, a love that pushed her to give more than she ever had, to believe in a boy abandoned by his parents, and to sacrifice her own comfort for his future. But sometimes, even the strongest bonds can fray, unraveling into tragedy. Langston was once a boy filled with curiosity and potential, the kind of child Aurelia believed could break the cycle of poverty and violence that surrounded them. She worked tirelessly to keep him safe, to show him a life beyond their troubled neighborhood. But the streets have a way of creeping in, pulling even the brightest young minds into their grasp. For Langston, the lure of fast money, gang life, and addiction proved too strong. And in the end, desperation turned him into someone unrecognizable, a man willing to destroy the very person who had given him everything. On one fateful night, the sacrifices Aurelia made collided with Langston's growing resentment. What started as a plea for help spiraled into a devastating moment of rage. A single gunshot shattered the silence of their home, leaving a community to grapple with the aftermath and a family forever broken. This is not just a story about a crime, it's a story about love, betrayal, and the choices that define us. How could it happen? Could it have been stopped? And what does it say about the fragile lines between hope and despair? Tonight, we uncover the haunting truth behind the lives of Aurelia Carter and her grandson Langston, a tragedy that left a community searching for answers and a legacy marked by heartbreak and lessons we cannot afford to ignore. Before we start, we would like to welcome you to our channel, True Crime Zone HQ. Thank you to all our viewers and a special shout out to our subscribers for your continued support. Together, we strive to improve and bring you daily updates on both told and untold true crime stories. Please don't forget to click the subscribe button if you haven't. Let's start. This is the story of Langston, a boy whose life was marked by abandonment and loss before he could even understand what those words meant. Left by his father, Tyler, before he was born, and later by his mother, Kaylin, as an infant, Langston was thrust into the care of his grandmother, Aurelia Carter. She was a woman of unwavering determination, who worked tirelessly to give him a life she believed he deserved. Before we can fully understand the life and choices of Langston Carter, we must first look at the life of his parents, his father, Tyler, and his mother, Kaylin. What choices did they make that shaped the life of Langston? Tyler's story begins long before he ever became a father, in a home where neglect was the norm and guidance was a rarity. By the age of 12, Tyler had already found himself on the wrong side of the law, arrested for breaking and entering. It was a stark reflection of his environment, a place where opportunities felt scarce, and trouble seemed to find him at every turn. The arrest marked the first of many encounters Tyler would have with the justice system. Despite receiving leniency from the judge, the conditions of his probation and community service felt like obstacles rather than a path to redemption. Without a strong support system, Tyler's behavior escalated, and by his late teens, his rap sheet included theft, vandalism, and drug possession. He was in and out of juvenile detention centers, each stay further distancing him from the possibility of a stable future. By the time he reached adulthood, Tyler had served multiple short prison sentences. Yet, each time he walked out a free man, his resolve to change was undermined by the challenges of reintegration. Jobs were scarce for someone with his record, and old habits were hard to break. He made half-hearted attempts to turn his life around, but the pull of his past was unrelenting. For Langston's mother Kaylin. Her story, though overshadowed by the tragedy that followed, is essential in piecing together the events that shaped Langston's life. Kaylin grew up under the care of her mother, Aurelia Carter, who worked tirelessly to provide for her as a single parent in Detroit's East Side. Aurelia's sacrifices, born out of love and necessity, set a powerful example for Kaylin. But as Kaylin grew older, the weight of expectation and the lure of independence began to pull her in different directions. Kaylin was known for her beauty and vibrant personality. In her teenage years, she dreamed of escaping the limitations of their neighborhood. She wanted to see the world, to explore the possibilities that lay beyond the boarded-up houses and cracked sidewalks that defined her childhood. Aurelia supported her dreams, pushing her to excel in school and instilling in her a belief in the power of education. However, life rarely unfolds as planned, and Kaylin's path took an unexpected turn. At a party hosted by mutual friends, amidst the laughter and clinking glasses, Kaylin met Tyler, a charismatic young man who quickly caught her attention. Tyler had a confidence and a way he carried himself that intrigued her, a charm that made him stand out from the crowd. Kaylin, with her warm smile and hopeful spirit, was a stark contrast to Tyler's turbulent past. She represented stability, a chance for Tyler to finally leave behind the chaos that had defined much of his life. Their bond grew quickly. They spent hours sharing their dreams, whispering about a future where they would leave their struggles behind and start anew. Tyler spoke of opening his own business, of being the kind of man people could look up to. Kaylin, captivated by his vision, believed in him completely. For a time, it seemed like they were on the same page, both yearning for a life filled with hope and possibility. But love, as powerful as it may be, isn't always enough to bridge the gap between dreams and reality. As their relationship deepened, Kaylin began to notice cracks in Tyler's resolve. His plans, while grand, lacked a clear path forward. His charm often masked his fears, and beneath his confident exterior was a man still haunted by the weight of his past mistakes. Kaylin tried to be patient, to support him, to be the steady force he seemed to need. And for a while, it worked. Everything changed the day Kaylin discovered she was pregnant. For her, the news was a mix of fear and excitement. She imagined a future where she could give her child the love and care she had always longed for. But when she shared the news with Tyler, his reaction was far from what she had hoped. Instead of joy or even cautious optimism, she was met with panic. Tyler's fear of responsibility overshadowed everything else. He argued with her, his words filled with desperation rather than malice. "We're not ready for this," he insisted. "A baby will ruin everything we've been planning." Tyler begged her to reconsider, suggesting an abortion as the only viable option for their future. But Kaylin, though shaken, refused. For her, this child was more than an unexpected responsibility, it was a chance to create something meaningful, something lasting. As Kaylin's resolve grew stronger, Tyler began to pull away. His calls became less frequent, his visits shorter, and his presence more distant. He struggled to reconcile his own fears with the life that Kaylin was now preparing for. And then, one day, he was gone. Tyler left, abandoning Kaylin and their unborn child without a goodbye or a second thought. For Kaylin, the betrayal was devastating. The man she had trusted, the man she had dreamed of building a life with, had chosen to walk away rather than face the challenges ahead. She was left to navigate the storm alone, grappling with the weight of her decision and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. After Tyler's abrupt departure, Kaylin was left to face an overwhelming reality. She was young, unemployed, and about to become a single mother. The future she had once envisioned for herself now seemed out of reach, replaced by an endless list of worries. How would she provide for her child? Where would she find the strength to keep moving forward when the odds felt so firmly stacked against her? When Langston was born, Kaylin's love for him was immediate and unconditional. She held him close, whispering promises of a better life, one where he would never feel the pain of abandonment she had endured. But as the days turned into weeks, the weight of her responsibilities began to bear down on her. Diapers, formula, sleepless nights, everything felt like an insurmountable challenge without a steady source of income or a support system to lean on. Kaylin tried to manage, but every solution she considered seemed to lead to a dead end. Job applications went unanswered, and the financial strain grew heavier with each passing day. Her savings, which had already been modest, dwindled to nothing. As much as she loved Langston, she began to feel like she was failing him. Her dreams of giving him a stable and nurturing life felt increasingly out of reach. In her desperation, Kaylin turned to the one person who had always been there for her, her mother, Aurelia Carter. Aurelia was no stranger to hard work or sacrifice. As a single mother herself, she had spent years juggling jobs, raising Kaylin, and building a life for them on Detroit's east side. If anyone could help, it was her. One quiet evening, Kaylin sat down with Aurelia at the kitchen table. The conversation was heavy with unspoken emotions, the kind of moment where silence said as much as words ever could. Kaylin explained her situation, her voice trembling as she admitted that she couldn't do it on her own. She asked Aurelia to take Langston, promising that it would only be temporary. "I'll send money when I can," she said. "I just need time to get back on my feet." Aurelia looked at her daughter, seeing the mixture of love, guilt, and desperation in her eyes. Without hesitation, she agreed. From that moment, Aurelia became not just Langston's grandmother, but his primary caregiver. She poured every ounce of love and energy into raising him, determined to give him the life Kaylin had dreamed of but couldn't provide. She transformed her modest home into a safe haven for Langston, filling it with books, toys, and the smell of home-cooked meals. Despite living in a neighborhood marked by poverty and hardship, Aurelia created an environment where Langston could thrive, or at least, she hoped he could. But as the months turned into years, Kaylin's promises of financial support went unfulfilled. At first, there were occasional calls, brief updates on her life, and assurances that things would get better. Then the calls became less frequent, until one day, they stopped altogether. Aurelia was left to raise Langston on her own, with no help from Kaylin or Tyler. It was a challenge, but one she faced with unwavering determination. Langston, still a young boy, had no idea of the sacrifices his grandmother was making for him. To him, Aurelia was simply home, the one constant in his life. She worked long hours as a teacher, often staying up late to grade papers after putting Langston to bed. She stretched every dollar to ensure he had what he needed, from clothes to school supplies, always putting his needs above her own. But no matter how hard she worked, the world outside their door remained a looming threat. Detroit's East Side was not an easy place to grow up. Boarded-up houses and graffiti-lined streets were a daily reminder of the struggles the community faced. Opportunities were scarce, and the sound of sirens was a constant backdrop to their lives. Aurelia did her best to shield Langston from the worst of it, but she knew the challenges he would face as he grew older. She prayed every night that her love and guidance would be enough to keep him on the right path. But as Langston grew, the pressures of their environment began to seep into his world. The older boys on the block, with their flashy clothes and easy money, became a source of fascination for him. Aurelia noticed the changes, small at first, but troubling nonetheless. She did everything she could to keep him focused, enrolling him in community programs, taking him to the library, and filling his weekends with activities that would nurture his curious mind. For a while, it seemed to work. By his late teens, Langston's life had taken a sharp turn. The allure of gang life, coupled with the temptations of drugs and fast money, pulled him further from the values Aurelia had tried to teach him. For every moment he spent tinkering with radios or reading books in his youth, there were now countless nights spent with the wrong crowd, in the wrong places, making decisions that would come back to haunt him. Aurelia watched helplessly as her grandson transformed into someone she barely recognized. Langston's choices came with consequences. His addiction grew, fueling reckless behavior and a mounting desperation for money. He no longer sought out his grandmother for advice or comfort, instead, he saw her as a means to an end. Aurelia, ever hopeful, believed that deep down, the boy she had raised was still there. She prayed for him, holding on to the belief that he could change. But Langston's intentions were far from noble. One evening, Langston sat down with Aurelia at the same kitchen table where so many of their meaningful conversations had taken place. This time, however, his tone was different, calculated, almost rehearsed. He spoke of a business idea, a mobile car detailing service that he claimed could help him turn his life around. He painted a vivid picture of success, describing how he would reinvest in the neighborhood and even hire people to help. "Grandma," he said, his voice steady, "this is my way out. I just need a little help to get started." Aurelia listened intently, her heart swelling with a cautious hope. She wanted nothing more than to see Langston succeed, to see him escape the grip of the streets. When he told her he needed $10,000 for equipment and setup, she hesitated. It was a staggering amount, her entire life savings. That money represented years of hard work and sacrifice. But more than that, it represented her belief in Langston, in the potential she still saw in him. Despite her reservations, Aurelia agreed. She handed him a check, her hands trembling as she looked him in the eye. "This is everything I have, Langston," she said, her voice filled with both love and urgency. "Don't waste it. Please, use it to build something good." Langston nodded, offering promises of gratitude and determination. In that moment, Aurelia allowed herself to believe that her sacrifice might finally be the turning point he needed. But within days, the cracks in Langston's story began to show. The grand plans he had spoken of so convincingly were never put into motion. Instead, the money disappeared as quickly as it had been given, swallowed by his addictions and reckless lifestyle. Aurelia noticed the changes immediately, the late nights, the smell of alcohol on his breath, and the way he avoided her questions. When she confronted him, his response was defensive, filled with excuses that only deepened her heartbreak. One evening, as Aurelia sat waiting for Langston to come home, she replayed their conversation in her mind. The boy she had raised with so much love, the boy she had sacrificed everything for, had betrayed her trust. Her heart ached with the weight of it, but she wasn't ready to give up on him. She resolved to confront him again, to find out what had really happened to the money and to push him toward accountability. But what she didn't know was that Langston's desperation was growing, and with it, his capacity for harm. It was late, the kind of night when the city seems to hold its breath, and even the sirens seem distant. Inside Aurelia's small home, the familiar sound of the kitchen clock ticking was the only thing breaking the silence. She sat at the edge of her bed, her Bible open on her lap, her glasses perched low on her nose. It was her nightly ritual, one that brought her peace after long days filled with worry about Langston. But tonight, something felt different. Langston had been out again, returning home late with an energy that was sharp and erratic. Aurelia had sensed it the moment he walked through the door. His movements were unsteady, his words clipped and barely coherent. When he finally sat across from her at the kitchen table, there was an intensity in his eyes that unsettled her. "Grandma, I need more money," he said abruptly, breaking the silence. His voice was sharp, almost impatient, as though he expected her to agree without hesitation. Aurelia set her Bible aside, her gaze steady. "Langston," she replied, her tone firm but calm, "I gave you everything I had. I can't do it again. You need to help yourself now." Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Langston's frustration was immediate. His fist slammed against the table, rattling the dishes left from dinner. "You don't get it," he shouted. "I need this, Grandma. Don't you see I'm trying to make things work?" But Aurelia didn't waver. She had heard these pleas before, and each time, they led to nothing but disappointment and heartbreak. "I love you, Langston," she said quietly, "but I won't let you take everything from me. Not like this." Her refusal was more than Langston could bear. He stormed out of the room, his footsteps heavy against the creaking floorboards. Aurelia exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair. She had hoped her words would reach him, but as the night grew quieter, an uneasy feeling settled over her. Somewhere in her heart, she knew this wasn't over. Moments later, Langston returned. This time, he wasn't alone. In his hand, he held a gun, its metallic surface catching the dim light of the room. Aurelia's breath caught in her chest as she looked up at him. "Langston," she said, her voice steady despite the fear rising within her, "what are you doing?" But Langston didn't answer. His hands trembled, his face a mixture of anger and desperation. "You think you can control everything?" he spat. "You think you're better than me?" Aurelia rose from her chair slowly, her hands raised in a gesture of calm. "Langston," she began, her voice soft, almost pleading, "You don't have to do this. Whatever you're going through, we can face it together. Just put the gun down." But her words only seemed to inflame him further. "You don't get it, Grandma," he said, his voice breaking. "I've got nothing left. Nothing." The next moment unfolded in a way that would forever change their family. Langston's hands shook violently as his emotions boiled over. The sound of the gunshot was deafening, reverberating through the small house like a thunderclap. Aurelia stumbled, her body collapsing to the floor as the world around her seemed to still. The Bible she had been reading earlier slid off the bed, landing beside her lifeless form. The home that had once been filled with love and warmth was now silent, consumed by the weight of what had just happened. Langston stood frozen, the gun still in his hand. The anger that had consumed him moments ago was replaced by a cold, sinking realization. He stared at his grandmother's still form, the woman who had given everything for him, and felt the enormity of what he had done crashing down around him. His chest heaved as he struggled to process the irreversible act he had committed. The stillness of the house was broken by the sound of approaching sirens. Neighbors, startled by the noise, had called the police, and now the flashing lights reflected through the windows. Langston didn't run. He didn't hide. He simply sat down at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, as officers burst through the door. As we transition to the aftermath of this unthinkable crime, think about the fragile line between love and desperation. Could Langston's actions have been prevented? Was there ever a chance for redemption, or was this outcome inevitable? Share your thoughts in the comments below, but, regardless of what happened that shaped his life, if you believe his action was unjustified, subscribe to this channel. When the police arrived at Aurelia Carter's home, they were met with a scene of unspeakable tragedy. Langston sat motionless at the kitchen table, his head buried in his hands. The gun he had used lay on the counter, its cold metallic surface a silent witness to what had just transpired. His once fierce anger had evaporated, leaving behind only an empty, hollow expression. He didn't resist when officers approached him, their voices firm but cautious. "Stand up and put your hands behind your back," one of them said. Langston obeyed, his movements slow and deliberate, as if the weight of his actions had drained him of any energy. Neighbors gathered outside, their hushed voices mixing with the distant hum of police radios. The flashing lights illuminated their faces, each one etched with disbelief and sorrow. "That's Aurelia's grandson," someone murmured. "How could he do this? She gave everything for him." The whispers grew louder as Langston was escorted out of the house, handcuffed and flanked by officers. He kept his head down, refusing to meet the gaze of the people who had once seen him as a bright, promising boy. Inside the house, investigators began piecing together the events that had led to this devastating moment. Aurelia's lifeless body lay in her bedroom, her Bible still open on the floor beside her. The scene was both heartbreaking and haunting, a stark reminder of the life she had lived and the love she had given. For the officers, it was more than just another case. It was a sobering glimpse into the complexities of family, sacrifice, and desperation. The days following Aurelia's death were marked by an overwhelming sense of grief. The community mourned the loss of a woman who had been a cornerstone of their neighborhood. She had been more than just a grandmother, she was a teacher, a mentor, and a source of hope for so many. At her memorial service, the church was filled with people whose lives she had touched. They shared stories of her kindness, her resilience, and her unwavering belief in the power of education and love. Langston's trial began months later, and the courtroom was packed with spectators, friends, family, and community members who struggled to reconcile the boy they had once known with the man who now sat at the defendant's table. Langston's appearance had changed. Gone was the bravado and the rebellious energy that had defined him in recent years. He looked smaller somehow, weighed down by the gravity of his actions. The prosecution presented a damning case, detailing Langston's descent into addiction, his manipulation of Aurelia, and the tragic night that ended her life. Witnesses, including neighbors and former friends, painted a picture of a young man who had squandered every opportunity given to him. They spoke of Aurelia's tireless efforts to save him, her sacrifices, and her unwavering hope that he could still turn his life around. The weight of their testimonies hung heavily in the air, a stark contrast to Langston's quiet remorse. When it was Langston's turn to speak, his voice was barely audible. He didn't attempt to justify his actions or shift the blame. Instead, he spoke of regret, a profound, crushing regret that he said would haunt him for the rest of his life. "I took everything from her," he said, tears streaming down his face. "She gave me love, a home, a chance, and I threw it all away. I'll never forgive myself for what I've done." The jury deliberated for hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. Langston was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. As the verdict was read, a heavy silence filled the room. Langston showed no reaction, his gaze fixed on the floor. For Aurelia's family and friends, the sentence brought little solace. Justice had been served, but the void left by her absence was impossible to fill. In the years that followed, Langston's story became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of the devastating consequences of addiction and poor choices. Inside the cold, unyielding walls of his prison cell, Langston spent his days replaying the events that had led to his grandmother's death. He wrote letters to her, letters that would never be read, pouring out his sorrow and longing for forgiveness. "I see your face every night," he wrote in one of them. "I hear your voice telling me to do better, to be better. I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm so sorry." The aftermath of Aurelia Carter's death was felt far beyond the walls of her small Detroit home. The community she had dedicated her life to serving mourned her loss with a depth of grief that was impossible to measure. Aurelia wasn't just a grandmother, she was a teacher, a mentor, and a trusted neighbor who had poured her heart into uplifting those around her. Her absence left an undeniable void, one that resonated in the hearts of everyone who had been touched by her unwavering kindness and generosity. At the local church where Aurelia had spent countless Sundays, a memorial service was held in her honor. The pews were filled to capacity with people whose lives she had impacted, former students who remembered her encouraging words, neighbors who had relied on her wisdom, and parents who had looked to her as a role model. The air was thick with emotion as the congregation reflected on her life. The pastor's voice, heavy with sorrow, carried through the church. Aurelia Carter believed in the power of love, even when it demanded everything from her. She showed us what it means to give without expecting anything in return. Her legacy will live on in the lives she touched. But the community didn't stop at grieving. They knew that Aurelia's life had been one of action, and they were determined to honor her in a way that reflected her values. A group of educators, community leaders, and local residents came together to establish a scholarship fund in her name. The Aurelia Carter Foundation for Education and Hope was born, designed to support at-risk youth in pursuing their dreams. She believed education was the key to breaking cycles of hardship, one organizer said. This fund will ensure that her belief continues to change lives for generations to come. Contributions poured in from across the city, from people who had never even met Aurelia but were moved by her story. The scholarship became more than just financial aid, it became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the face of tragedy, hope could still be cultivated. The first recipients of the scholarship spoke openly about what it meant to them, many of them echoing the words of a young man who had once been one of Aurelia's students. "She told me I could be anything I wanted," he said, his voice trembling. This scholarship is proof that she was right. As the community came together to honor Aurelia's legacy, the tragedy also sparked difficult conversations. People began asking questions about the systemic issues that had led to her death, the lack of support for families in poverty, the challenges faced by single parents, and the grip of addiction that so often tightened its hold on vulnerable communities. Aurelia's story became a cautionary tale, not just about the devastating effects of one person's choices, but about the larger failures that had contributed to those choices. Experts and community leaders joined forums and discussions, pointing to the need for better mental health resources, addiction recovery programs, and mentorship initiatives for at-risk youth. Aurelia's life, though cut short, became a rallying cry for change. "If we want to honor her," one speaker said at a community meeting, we have to do more than mourn. We have to act. We have to build a world where stories like this don't happen again. As we close the chapter on Aurelia Carter's life, we are left with a haunting question: what would you have done in her place? Could you have sacrificed everything for someone who betrayed your trust so completely? Aurelia's unwavering belief in her grandson was both her greatest strength and her ultimate vulnerability. It was this belief that defined her life and, tragically, brought it to an end. Her story challenges us to reflect not just on her choices but on our own. How do we navigate the thin line between love and enabling? When do sacrifices meant to build someone up begin to tear us down? And most importantly, how can we better support families and youth so that stories like Langston's don't have to end in devastation? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary ones. They force us to look at the cracks in our systems and the ways in which we, as a community, can help mend them. Aurelia's legacy lives on through the scholarship fund established in her name, through the lives of the students who will benefit from her sacrifices, and through the conversations her story has sparked. She taught us the value of love, of resilience, and of giving, even when it demands everything from us. But her death also teaches us that love alone is not always enough, that without the right resources, without a strong support system, even the most unshakable bonds can be strained to their breaking point. Langston's fate is a sobering reminder of what happens when desperation clouds judgment and the wrong choices are made in critical moments. It's a story that asks us to think deeply about the cycles of poverty, addiction, and violence that plague so many communities. It's easy to look at Langston's actions and cast blame, but his story, and Aurelia's, reveals something far more profound: the urgent need for change, for prevention, and for understanding the weight of the challenges so many families face every day. As you sit with the weight of this story, we ask you to imagine yourself in Aurelia's position. What would you have done differently? Would you have made the same sacrifices, taken the same risks? Or would you have chosen another path? And what about Langston? Was there a moment where his life could have turned in another direction, moment where intervention could have made all the difference? These are questions that don't have easy answers, but they are questions we must ask if we hope to create a better world. Thank you for joining us as we explored this heartbreaking tale of love, loss, and the choices that define us. Stories like Aurelia's remind us of the importance of community, of standing together to support those who are struggling, and of finding ways to build a future where tragedies like this are no longer inevitable. If Aurelia's story moved you, if it made you think, or if it inspired you to act, please share your thoughts in the comment section. Let us know what you would have done and how we can work together to prevent these tragedies. And before you go, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to tell the stories that matter, stories that challenge us to reflect, to grow, and to act. We'll see you next time, as we uncover another tale of resilience, heartbreak, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Thank you for watching.